Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to the Behavioral Corner. My name is Steve Martirano. I get to hang for a living. It's just the greatest thing in the world. We're here and we're lucky enough all the time on the Behavioral Corner to run into interesting people. And then we sit on the stoop and we find out, what's so interesting about them, I guess. I got a good one for you today. As you know, we deal with the subject of behavioral health, very broad term. Put simply, the way we behave affects our health. The decisions we make, the choices we decide on, all have an impact. So, we had a broad mandate to talk to all kinds of interesting people. The topic of substance abuse, though, is often central to our discussions here. And I like to say, in a phrase I take full credit for, all stories of substance abuse and recovery are the same, except they're different. And I got to tell you something. No one proves that more obviously, in my opinion, than our guest today, Jason Mohr. Jason is a novelist, five novels under his belt by now. And
Josh.
I'm Josh. Oh my God, Josh! How many times are we going to go through this? I'm sorry, Josh.
No worries.
Sorry, Josh. Can we change your name for the purpose of the interview?
Well, it's probably easier, right?
Let's just do this. I'm sorry, Jason. Jason Mohr, novelist, 5 under his belt, very impressive. And a couple of memoirs as well. The latest of which, a model citizen, is how he came to our attention. And it's an amazing story, as I say, of substance abuse issues and ultimate recovery from them, in a manner of speaking. Jason, thanks for spending some time with us on the corner.
Thank you very much for hosting me today, Steve. I appreciate it. My name's still Josh, by the way.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. All right, Josh, listen, do you know what I mean when I say that all these stories are the same, except they're different? Yours, when I first became aware of the memoir, and I did so through a review in the New York Times, the first line in the review is what caught my attention, because I don't know what you think of the review, it was pretty favorable, but he says you're a man without regret. And I thought, well, there you go. That's a new take on hey, I'm sober now.
Right.
Is it true? Do you have no regret?
I understand why they wanted that to be sort of one of the theses that they're going to explore in the review. I think broadly what he meant by that is, I'm not trying to flog myself necessarily for all the blunders and mistakes from when I was still dirty. I would argue that, the current iteration of you and the current iteration of me wouldn't exist without the mistakes and blunders and the lessons either learned or not learned from our younger, wilder days. So in that sense, I look back on those things and be like, God, that was probably a shitty way to do things, or that was a shitty things to say or not say. Would I look back on specific micro things that have happened and have some regret? Of course.
Yeah.
I'm a human with a conscience.
Right.
But I also think, a lot of recovery people it's always about like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And that's not my default mechanism.
Okay. See, that's what's fascinating about this, because I've done a lot of these interviews.
Sure.
And you often hear that, and it's always heartfelt. It's always sincere about the damage done and all of that. But regret's an interesting thing.
Right.
It's almost, while unavoidable, beside the point. I mean, what possible good does ruining something have to do with anything? But when somebody,
it's an odd dichotomy from a memoirist too. Like obviously, memory and the examination and the excavation of the past is important to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done the work in the first place. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, I want to just drag myself over the coals for 300 pages.
Right. There is something. To that. I think what I took out of I've read parts of your book. I haven't gotten the whole thing yet. But what I got out of the review was the reviewer was also struck by oh my God, I'm so sorry for all this, was not the central theme of this story. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your age, and where you grew up, and when the problems with, I guess it started with alcohol, began for you.
Yeah, I was the product, as most, not every, but a lot of people from my tribe, like we like fire, we like chaos, because we grew up in anarchy. That was certainly the way that I came of age in Arizona, with an addict for a primary parent. So I was around, booze and drugs and people making suspect and dangerous decisions my entire life. And I like that. I was the sort of drinker, I was the sort of drug person who loved oblivion. Like my goal every day was to black out from a very early age. Like even in junior high school, I remember very vividly being like, oh, if I drink 10 of these, if I have, even more acid, like I'll leave this place. And I liked that from a very early age. That was something that was important to me. But, I don't think I would have written a memoir that was just about addiction. If the story was just, I used to do a lot of drugs and now I don't do drugs anymore, I don't think I would have written that book, because that book's been written a cajillion times. I was interested in kind of the medical mystery of my particular story, which was, in my 30s, I started to have these series of strokes. And I had 3 very serious ones before they realized that I was born missing an entire wall in the middle of my heart, and that the surgeons were going to go into my heart and build a wall, which is this really cool thing that I didn't even know that they could do. So what was interesting about it from my perspective is like, yes, they can save my life, but in order for them to save my life, I had to get high on opiates for the heart surgery. So really what the surgeon was presenting me with was this really awful equation, which was, in order to save my life, I have to risk everything I've worked so hard to rebuild as a sober person. So in a sense, that becomes an existential question. It's not just a book about addicts for addicts. These existential questions kind of extend the conversation to everybody in the world, being like, what would I do faced in this scenario that doesn't have a right answer? How am I supposed to approach this? Hopefully that question is inviting enough that it's going to bring people into the world of the book.
Yes, and now it becomes apparent why you would move from from fiction to nonfiction, because this is a compelling dilemma that the hero is facing.
Sure.
So I guess you go through some kind of cost benefit analysis, right? You're in your 30s and you had 3 strokes.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, am I going to die of a stroke, no matter how much intervention they do? And if that's the case, or likely the case, why get clean? Right. Did you go through all that?
Oh, for sure. Nate, it's always hard if you have, the addict's brain. You have a life sentence with a learning virus living in your mind. It's like it's going to try one route to make you relapse. And if that's not going to work, it's going to change over here, and it's going to change over here.
And in your case, it demonstrates how incredibly creative that mind was, because they went, oh, I know.
Yeah.
Let's give him a couple of strokes.
Right.
See how he handles that.
To be honest with you, Steve, the thing that really made me want to write the book is when I had the 3rd stroke, when my daughter was 18 months old. And I was convinced that I was going to die on the operating table. My surgery of that year was scheduled for March 11th. So I had kind of this 2-month window. And I asked my neurovascular surgeon, like, what should I be doing? And he just said this real one chilling thing. He said, just stay alive.
Hmm.
I was like, fuck, that's the advice? It's like, this is even worse than I thought, if that's your advice. And,
He must,
because I'm a novelist, because
yeah,
I use the written word to make sense of things,
yeah.
I wanted to write this love letter to my kid, being like, if I do die on the operating table, I want her to know who her father was during his short, very flawed time
Yeah.
planet. So it started as a love letter, and hopefully the entire project is imbued with that kind of visceral affection, because that's really what, in essence, the book is about.
Well, people who are interested in this topic are going to benefit from your artistic mind, because that's what my experience talking to folks that create the way you do. They often see the real things in their life as a plot. Oh,
Right.
this is an
Yeah.
interesting thing, and this is going to happen, and I wonder what will happen next.
Right.
And so we benefit from that. Backing up a little bit, how did you go through the standard multiple trips to rehab and go through all of that as well?
I went to only rehab. I only went to rehab one time. And I was coming right off of a suicide attempt, so it
Mm-hmm.
was like, I was, for lack of a better word, ready, like
Mm-hmm.
when you take
Mm-hmm.
yourself to kind of the ultimate awful place.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I really understood what the word surrender meant for the first time in my life, which is like, I'd been fighting so hard and feeling like I was the one who was going to crack the code that nobody else had been able to crack all along. And then you realize, that's hubris and that's deception. And you swallow your pride, and you finally know what capital S surrender is, and you give yourself to something greater than yourself.
Yeah, that
It's a
addictive,
terrifying thing, right?
that addictive mind, uh, as we mentioned earlier, is a tricky thing. I'm reminded of that line of dialogue from the movie The Usual Suspects, when they talk about the arch criminal Kaiser Sose. Do you remember that movie?
Of course. Yeah.
Well, the great line is Kevin Spacey's line is, the greatest trick that Satan ever pulled was in convincing you he doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got this addictive mind going, no, you can do it, man. Don't,
Yep.
you can do this. Come on, get serious.
Well, and I've been saying, as I've been doing publicity for the book, that I don't consider this an addiction memoir.
Mm-hmm.
That I consider this to be a relapse memoir, which I think is a really important distinction. Although for some people that might seem as though I'm splitting hairs. But the reason I think that that's important is, I don't think getting clean is hard. I think most people can get clean. I think staying clean is tremendously difficult. And the parts 3 and 4, like the second half of the book, are thrusting and forcing the reader to occupy the mindset of somebody who, from the outside, everything seems like it's going fine. But I'm letting them kind of be privy to those addict, kind of fantastic malfunctions that happen in our thought process every day. Because I think, people don't want to believe that the people in their lives who are clean, they don't want to think about them being as vulnerable as they really are. Like if your mom gets clean, your daughter gets clean, your sister gets clean, you want to say to yourself, they're fixed now. But I felt like my heart surgery was the perfect way to have this conversation, because I had the heart surgery after the 3 strokes, and they said to me, Josh, you're fixed now. And then 2 years later, I had another fucking stroke.
You got dealt a pretty weird hand. No doubt about it. Josh Mohr is our guest. He is a writer, a novelist, and the author of a memoir entitled Model Citizen. It's as I said, it is a unique look at a very common situation. People struggling with many things, substance abuse in this case, and then getting to that moment when they try to master the situation. Let me ask you about that. I don't know. I think you use the word clarity in your memoir. You talk about this clear moment. It's another motif that always presents itself. This moment of clarity when the substance abuser says, "This isn't working.
Right.
I've got to try something else."
Yeah.
Let me ask you personally what you think, because I've wondered about this. Do you think that moment of clarity, which is difficult enough to reach, is arrived at when the substance abuser has done so much damage to themselves that they must change, or they have done so much collateral damage to the people around them that they must change. How was it for you?
I think if you're lucky enough, and I'll put that word in quotation marks, if you're lucky enough to find your way to the sunny side of the street with only collateral damage, I would call that a high bottom. I would say that's the best possible outcome, and it's a horrible possible outcome. Most of us have to ruin our own lives too. You know, you have to go to that place where you say, like, I'm going to die. I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to get clean. We all want to feel like we're the exception to the rule, but we're not the exception to the rule. We're the rule. And I got to this place where, I think most people who try to take their own lives would say that they just come to this moment where they say, like, I don't know what's next. I just know that it has to ache less than I ache here.
Yeah. It says something deep about human beings in general, that, as you just said, it has to be personal,
right,
before you want to get a handle on it, in spite of the fact of the pain you're causing to your family.
Yeah.
I mean,
I lost a wife. I was married for the first time, and like that went up in smoke. And like, they always say, it's 50% here, 50% there. It takes two to tango. Not in the addicts world. Like I was well equipped to ruin that all by myself. Thank you very much. But again, like I left the marriage and was like, well, we just weren't compatible.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Tra la la, and then went about my merry way.
Yeah. How bad did
you have to have that? It has to be that intimate, visceral thing. At least if you're programmed like I am, it had to come from like, oh no, I'm actually going to die.
Yeah. Well, self-preservation and all that. So did you run the gamut of substances? I mean, did you do it all?
I did. Yeah. I mean, we all have our favorites, I mean, certainly booze was there. I loved opiates. I shot Special K a lot. I also did drugs based on where I was in the day, or if it's 10 o'clock at night and I want to stay out all night, like the only logical thing to do is to get an 8-ball of cocaine, of course, and then I got to come down to go to sleep. So, it was always like, it was all about the lifestyle, and which vices and which supplies I needed to prolong the party as long as I possibly could prolong it.
Yeah. A lot of people don't understand that, who either don't have a problem or don't have it in their lives, but didn't do it even recreationally, the way you say you started. And everyone who's done that, and I include my generation certainly in recreational drug pioneers, balancing the drugs in order to keep the party going.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about the gateway drugs and whatnot. I obviously don't have any problem with. I'm sure that's true for a lot of people, but I think there are people who are wired like me, where like, say you're 10, you're 11 years old, and you give yourself alcohol poisoning for the first time, and you're getting sick, you're throwing up, and you think to yourself, this is the best feeling in the world.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the idea of a gateway drug, I think, is probably now pretty much discarded, because the truth of the matter is that your mind is the greatest.
All right here,
the greatest. Your mind can convince you anything's a good idea at
absolutely.
the moment. Let me ask you about that, because that's another phenomenon of substance abusers and people in recovery, and it's something that a clinician told me is referred to in the therapeutic realm as euphoric recall. I don't know whether you've ever heard this expression, but it's characterized by, if you've ever seen a group of people together who are in recovery, they will begin swapping stories.
Right.
Oh, you think you used to get screwed up? Well, let me tell you about the time I went to sleep in Florida and woke up in Venezuela.
Yep.
And that's called euphoric recall, the good old days. And the therapist says it has to occur, but the clinician forces the person recalling to continue the story. Don't end the story with how cool it was to wake up in Venezuela. Tell about getting thrown in the prison.
Yep.
So you must still have those moments where you go, oh, I mean, you have a great moment in the book where you talk about you could even step back now and look at some incident in Vegas where you're running around with your pal
Right.
half naked. When you look back at that, what is that? How do you feel about that?
Well, in terms of the euphoric recall of it all, I mean, that happens to me a lot in dreams. Like I have
Mhm.
a lot of relapse dreams, and there's such a binary in that. Like I'll wake up half of the time and be like, that was so much fun. Like I was glad I got to like go back to that world for an hour without any consequences. But when I was getting out of rehab, what you were just talking about, like keep the story going, is
Mhm.
one of the greatest tools that I was given on my way out the door. And then what my counselor used to call it was just like play it to the end.
Yep.
Like so you go out to a ball game with a friend and you see somebody else have a beer and you think to yourself, I would like a beer. Okay, well you'll drink that beer. And then they'll go home and you'll go to Tijuana. And and so you keep the story going, keep the story
Exactly
going.
right. Exactly right.
So you can kind of use those superimpositions in a way to kind of keep yourself on the straight and narrow, because you can't like the seduction of that one beer is such a mirage for people from my tribe. Some people can
Mhm.
do that, and I wish I
Yep.
was one of them, but I'm just
Yep.
not.
It's a deep insight to realize that you're not part of that group.
Right.
Josh Mohr is our guest. Josh, as I said, is it seems by inclination, a novelist, and now he's written two memoirs. The latest called Model Citizen, about his struggles with substance abuse, his health issues, and how he's come out the other side of that. I'd like to talk a little bit about your process as a writer and the way it works for you. When you write a novel, I don't know how you work, but I've read many writers who talk about they don't lose control of their characters, but they sort of let the characters free.
Yeah.
They sit down and go, well, this is sort of what I think is going to happen, but who knows where he's going to go.
Right.
When you write a memoir, it's much different because you now know where the protagonist is going to wind up. How does it influence your writing?
Well, I think from a novelist point of view, you're kind of discovering during those nascent drafts, maybe draft 1, 2, 3, you're figuring out like the what of the story. Like what the hell's the plot? What the hell's going to happen? The what is kind of on the forefront of the novelist's mind, and a little bit of why as you're starting to think about, the psychological and the emotional filter of the main character, and how he or she sees the world is then going to influence the plot. So it's kind of like the collision of the what and the why is what's fueling those early gusts of enthusiastic creativity. Whereas as a novel, as a memoirist, you don't have to worry and really ponder about the what. You're thinking about the how. The how meaning like, how are you going to tell the story? Like I know that this story that I wrote in Model Citizen has been written 5,000 times, and that's a generous estimate.
Last month it was written 5,000 times.
Right. And
Yes,
so then
yes.
how do you do it in a way that people haven't heard it before? So I think, as a memoirist, the first thing that you want to do is you want the book to be a reflection about how you sound. Like the book needs to sound from a cadence or time signature perspective the same way that you talk. Make it personal. I also think that the book should be a reflection of the life lived. So like I've lived a very punk rock life. So I wrote Model Citizen to sound like a punk rock song.
Yes.
What I mean by that is that I left a bunch of mistakes in there. Like if it was a novel and if it belonged to somebody that I made up, I would have sanded down additional edges. But because I wanted it to sound punk rock, I wanted the guitars to be out of tune.
Yeah, I
Right?
hear you.
I wanted the
I
singer
hear
to
you.
be hoarse.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, as you know, fiction sort of has to make sense.
Right.
Nonfiction does not have to make
Yep.
sense. It
Yep.
just has to be what it is. The thing I was struck by in the book Model Citizen is your ability to do just what you said, which is a really tricky thing, and that is be the creator of this story, or actually be the object of the story, but write it in a way detached,
Right.
as though you're watching it happen,
Yep.
objectively, without sentimentality. The Times said without regret, which is a little overstated. That was a congratulations. That's I think too often memoirists anyway think they've got to constantly keep hitting you over the head with, this really happened to me, and this is how I feel about it, rather than going, here's what happened.
Well, I would say too that I think one of the reasons, I mean, I think frankly, most memoirs are really boring. And I think one of the reasons that I think most memoirs are really boring is it's exactly what you're talking about. It's the balancing act between the two versions of the memoirist in the book. So there's the version of the memoirist who's situated and oriented in history. And he or she's the person who's actually, going through the series of events in the book. And then there's a person who sits outside the scope of the book,
Yes,
who's retrospectively looking back. And how do you toggle fluidly and organically between those two eyes in a way that's going to make the book feel cool, mysterious? And sometimes memoirists lean so much on the version of themselves outside the scope of the book that it makes it sound like they're writing from this like enlightened perch of wisdom, which is fucking bullshit.
Yep. And not nearly as interesting. There's a phenomenon that is familiar to people who, I guess, pay attention to this kind of stuff.
And I would argue too, Steve, that one of the things that unites us as a species is the fact that we're all confused. We might not all be confused about the same things, but we are all confused. And so I like memoirists at the beginning of the book that's like, look, I'm a confused animal too. And I want to tell you some stuff that's been happening to me because I'm trying to make sense of what it means to be alive in this very bemusing world.
Well, and that's why your memoir about it, we said a very typical phenomenon, tragically, and that's substance abuse and trying to get straight again, is a particular value because it is in that vein. We're stumbling around in the dark and trying to figure out how I got here. There's a thing called an unreliable narrator. You can read, and you can enjoy that sometimes. You don't know whether the person that's talking to you in the book is lying or not. That can be fun. In your case, in this memoir, there is this sense that the narrator, you, is not so much reliable or unreliable, but just going, I don't know. What do you make of this?
Right.
What does any of this make any sense to you?
Yeah.
Let me ask you
one. I think there's also like there's some humility.
Oh, yes.
So some grace in this idea about like trying to write the book in such a way that it sounds like I'm sitting on the bar stool right next to you, whispering the story in your ear. I want it to feel that intimate, that you and I are constructing this book in real time together. I want the audience to feel as close to the action as she possibly can feel.
Yeah. Josh Mohr is with us. That's exactly why we invited you, because we couldn't go into the bar, but we can hang here on the corner, the behavioral corner. Josh, just a couple more minutes here. I know you've got a hard out here coming up. You mentioned early on that your primary caregiver as you were young was a substance abuser and addict. Your father was absent from your life. What was what's occurred?
My parents split up when I was young, and my mom was in Arizona. And at that point, I think they kind of defaulted more. This is the early 80s, where they kind of defaulted more to like, oh, obviously the mother is a more reliable parent than the father is. Obviously, we realized at this stage that that's not true. There was more to the story that I didn't know back then. Mm-hmm. My father was a Lutheran minister who, he's dead now, but at the time he was having an affair with someone in his congregation. And the part of the story I didn't hear was, if you just vanish, like, we'll help you keep this secret. Whereas if you like fight us in a custody battle, like all your dirty laundry is going to come out. So he bolted to, at that time, ministers couldn't get divorced or they would lose their job. So when they split up, he went to Berkeley to do a PhD in archaeology at Cal. And I lived with her until I turned 12. And at that point, I don't know if the law is the same now, but back then, once you turned 12, that's when the minor was allowed to say which parent they prefer to live with.
Really? Huh.
But then at 12, I said, I would like to not live with a pill-popping alcoholic anymore. So I moved to the Bay Area to live with my father, his new wife, and I had a new half sister. And that obviously presented its own system of challenges too, right? Where you kind of get there and you're like, wait a minute, my mom was such a mess that you had to leave, but you left me behind.
Yes.
And
So abandoned.
now you like these people more than me.
Yeah. And suddenly you're automatically a stranger.
Yeah.
In a strange situation. 12 years, you're able to, by the laws of that state, decide, what's wrong with that law is that they don't give you the third option of saying, neither one of these two.
Right.
Can we find somebody else?
Well, what's interesting about my father, who, he died really young. He died when he was 52. And he died still really valuing his persona. And he didn't really want anybody to know him. Like, he wanted the people to know this slick veneer of a charismatic, handsome minister.
Yeah.
And because he never let me know him, it's actually, Steve, one of the reasons that I wanted to overcorrect and share everything with Ava, even the things that my daughter, there's no way she would want to know about me. But because I was kept from the truth, I wanted to err on the side of just blah. Here's the whole story. You can sift through it and make from it what you want to make from it.
Well, when you've lived, and I'll use the word interesting, an interesting life, the way you have, problematic though it was, what point would it be of leaving anything out? I mean, there wouldn't be any point in that. The story's worth telling. Tell the story.
Yeah, in fact, when I tour with the book, when I talk about it being a love letter, some people who have read it, I can kind of see their brows furrow, and what they're thinking to themselves is like, Josh, have you ever even read a love letter? Because they're not supposed to have this many felonies in them.
When you do on the tour, and are you speaking to readers, general readers, or are you in front of AA groups, or are you mixing it? You're doing both?
Under the old rules of the old world, when I would be doing like a physical tour, I absolutely spoke to as many, NA, AA groups as I could along the way.
How are they? How is that crowd responding?
Oh God, it's great.
Yeah,
because they're used to people kind of talking to them as tourists, and like I walk into the room and I'm like, just another disaster, and we just have like a raucous good time together.
Yeah. I can see them going, oh, far out. He's got this book out and he's on this tour and he's just as confused as ever. And
absolutely. I try to talk to incarcerated populations as much as I can too, because when I was in graduate school at the University of San Francisco, my first teaching job was at a halfway house. And so I had a bunch of obviously emotional allegiances to that population way back then. And I still try to stay as involved as I can, just, sharing my story. If I can help one other person, that makes it all worth it.
Did you write when you were high and drinking?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What is it? Do you have any opinion on what it is with alcohol and writers? They're a long tradition. They go often hand in hand. What's that about?
I think it's the easiest way to hack into a flow state, where it completely turns off your conscious mind and it completely empowers your sub and your unconscious. You can do the same thing with, rigorous exercise, sex, meditation. There are other ways to kind of replicate that moment where when you're really in the writing zone, there's no such thing as the past and there's no such thing as the future. And that's the flow state. That's like surfing. Right. That's like boxing. You can't think about anything else.
Yeah, there's a suspension of time.
Absolutely.
It's pure moment. Well, listen, the book is entitled Model Citizen. Josh Mohr, our guest, terrific job. This is one of those books about a specific topic that really can be read by anyone. If you've never had a situation like this in your life, you'll still get something from Model Citizen. If you are struggling, if you are haven't gotten there yet and figured it out, again, this is a pretty good Here's What Happened to Me by Josh Mohr. Good luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
Are you working on something? You're back working on something else? You got something else in the pipeline?
Oh, I'm always scribbling. So my next book is going to be called Get Rich. It's about the first female poker dealer in Gold Rush, San Francisco.
Oh, really?
It's my first historical novel. It was a blast to put together. I can't wait to share it with people.
Terrific. Josh Mohr, thanks for joining us on the Behavioral Corner. Really appreciate it.
Keep fighting the good fight, Steve. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye. Everybody.
At Retreat Behavioral Health, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 and begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.